not being satisfied with the way the nose looks, unfortunately we can interrupt the function of the nose. And quite commonly, particularly 20 years ago, pretty noses were coming out, but non-functioning noses were coming out.
Can you show us what happened?
Sure, sure. I think for the audience's sake, we might want to explore a little bit of the anatomy so that we can better understand the nasal structures and understand why this is such a complicated operation.
Take us through it.
Okay, this is obviously a skull, but we're going to concentrate just on the nose itself. And as we've seen in our high school biology classes, we know that the nose from a skeleton really doesn't look like a nose at all. There's a little bit of nasal bone up here, but from the side view you can see that almost no nose exists on the skeleton itself. We have to add to the bone. And what we're adding is cartilage. Cartilage is like celery. It can bend, but ultimately can break, and it's what our ears are made of. That's what cartilage is. The first piece of cartilage we've added to the skeleton is the septum, which is the partition between the right and the left nostril, separating the chambers. Now, we've often heard of the term deviated nasal septum.
Everybody's got it.
Everybody's got one of those. And what that means, and this skeleton has it as well, is that the septum, rather than being perfectly midline, is shifted off to one side or the other, or buckled, or fractured to a certain degree. But that's what we refer to as a deviated nasal septum. But even this doesn't look exactly like a nose. We have to add another structure. And what we're adding now is the upper lateral cartilages. And those extend off of the nasal bone and come down to the top portion of the nasal septum, and that creates the mid-third of the nose. We can get an idea of what this contributes to our nasal anatomy by pushing down on the tip of our nose. And when we do that, we see the nasal bones and the upper lateral cartilages, as we can see in this patient example. But still, we haven't built the tip of the nose. We have to add yet a third piece of cartilaginous structure. Besides the nasal septum, besides the upper lateral cartilage, we have to add now the lower lateral cartilage. And that is a freestanding structure that comes up above the nasal dorsum, or the nasal bridge, and that is what constitutes or what creates the nasal tip. We can see the tip of the nose and the bridge of the nose, and this looks more like what the nose typically looks like. Here it is again on the right side. There obviously would be a paired lower lateral cartilage on this side, and then if we add skin on top of all of this, we get, if you will, a nose. Now, some of the problems that occur in rhinoplasty in an effort to make a pretty-looking nose is to remove some of that cartilage, or remove too much of that cartilage.
The structure.
The structure, the very structure that builds our nose, we can take too much of it out. And in the process, we lose that support, the structure necessary for us to breathe. This is a case in point. This individual had 2 rhinoplasties already, not because she wasn't satisfied with the look of her nose, but because she couldn't breathe. When she tries to take a deep breath, the nose pinches in because it's lost all of that structural support on the side of the nose. Here she is in her relaxed state, and when she breathes in, she collapses on both sides. And why is that? Well, you know that this portion is bone,
right,
and we've just seen that this portion here is the upper lateral cartilage.
And that's collapsed.
And you can see that this is collapsed. There's a step off from here to here. This whole area is collapsed. So while we try to maintain post-operatively the look of her nose, we're also trying to rebuild the structural integrity of this area so that when she breathes in, it remains open and wide, and you have not only form, but function. Let's go over another problem that can occur in rhinoplasty is this individual had a rhinoplasty and afterwards was unable to breathe. He also had collapse in this region here called the external valve. That's an area where the bone and the lower lateral cartilage connect, and if it's weakened, it just collapses in. But the prior surgeon also tried to address this area by putting a piece of cartilage in, which somehow migrated up to the tip of his nose and gave him this extra bump. And that, unfortunately, cannot be another consequence of cosmetic surgery, is where you put things sometimes move. And we try to carefully put them into what I call perfect pockets, or suture secure them with our sutures, our threads, but occasionally they don't stay there. So in this individual, we not only removed the cartilage, the cartilage that was placed in the wrong position, but we also projected the tip of his nose, and we also tried to bring it down a little bit, because both of those maneuvers, both of those states gave him a rather sort of short, snubbed-like nose, and he wanted it further out and slightly counter-rotated is the term. In order to do this technique, we needed rib cartilage. And it brings out another interesting distinction between primary rhinoplasty and the complex revision rhinoplasty. Revision rhinoplasty often requires that we use a variety of other material, different tools, different techniques than primary rhinoplasty. Whereas the primary, we're often taking things out. In the secondary, we're
putting it back,
adding it in.
Yeah.
We can take cartilage from the septum, or the partition between the right and the left nostril. If there isn't enough there, we often go to the ear. We can take a fair amount of cartilage from the ear without distorting the way the ear looks.